Okay, all right, I'm gonna call to order the 8:22 meeting of the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency. I mentioned we have Director Engfer is video conferencing from Midway, Utah, and Director Smalley is teleconferencing from Pioneer, California. Good for you. Okay, can I get a roll call, please?
Director Cassidy.
Here.
Director Dillis. Not here yet. Director Engfer.
Here.
Here.
Director McPherson.
Here.
Director Perry.
Here.
Director Pollock.
Here.
Director Smalley.
Here.
And we have a couple of alternate directors acting in a voting capacity. Director Leishman.
Here.
And I'm looking, I was anticipating another director, but I'm not seeing her yet. Just a note, we have a couple directors who let us know in advance they would not be attending. So Director Koenig and Director Stiles both informed us today. And Director Largay, who is a new appointment on behalf of San Lorenzo Valley Water District, let us know they would not be able to attend.
There's a road closure on Grand Hill Road, and there's a detour onto Lockwood Lane that's backed up all the way from one end to the other and going very slow.
Okay.
Could be some of that.
Got it, thank you.
Wow, that stinks. Okay, do we have any additions or deletions to the agenda? Hearing none. Oral communication on matters not on the agenda from anyone in our vast audience out there, or anyone here in the room who is not a...
I'm not seeing any hands go up online.
Okay, all right. Then the consent agenda, do I have a motion for the consent agenda, or someone want to remove it?
Move.
Okay, second?
Second.
Okay, I'll give Dale a second on that. So that was,
Chair Perry, I did see Director Engfer's hand
Oh,
shot up at
okay,
some point,
sorry.
so let me make sure. Yes. Director Engfer.
Yeah, just a minor correction to the minutes. I don't think it requires polling, but Heidi Lukenbach attended the May meeting as a member of staff, agency staff. It's not accurately reflected in the minutes as drafted. So if the motion could be amended to approve the minutes as amended, that'd be great.
So amended.
okay, Director Eden, approve the motions, the minutes so amended, and the second, I assume, is still stands?
Still stands.
Okay, so I guess we have to do a roll call vote, because we have members online.
That's correct. So here we go. Director Cassidy.
Aye.
Director Engfer.
Aye.
Director Koopman.
Aye.
Director McPherson.
Aye.
Director Perry.
Aye.
Director Pollock.
Aye.
Director Smalley.
Aye.
Director Leishman.
Aye.
Okay.
Okay, presentations are next. Rob, you're gonna be doing the groundwater sustainability program update.
Yes, thank you. I have a few updates as are noted in the packet. We will talk about a few of these. And the first is the Department of Water Resources Projects and Management Actions Module. So as the department continues to be responsible for overseeing SGMA through time, they continue to develop tools, in particular on web portals. One of those newest ones is Projects and Management Actions Module. So really the department judges your implementation of your plan based on two criteria. One is, are you meeting your sustainable management criteria? But the other is, are you implementing your plan? And so to track that better, they have developed this project that is essentially going through every groundwater sustainability plan and pulling all of the projects and management actions identified into a database. And ultimately, that database will be managed and updated through time. So we're expecting to see a summary of the projects that they pulled from our plan. It's very interesting because even though the state issued guidance on developing these plans, I've seen many groundwater sustainability plans that have a different approach in the way that they describe the projects and management actions. So it's going to be interesting to see how they put this into a database and how consistent it's going to be. They'll be sending us information towards the end of this month or early September for review. If there's any questions that I have from any of the agencies, if anything looks a little fishy to me, I may be following up with you. But otherwise, that'll go into a portal and will go live in October. We'll be expected to update the status of our project implementation with each annual report. So the good news is that they are releasing that this October, so we'll have a good feel for what they're going to be expecting. And as we prepare this next annual report, we start that in October, we'll do that with a cut and paste sort of information in mind, right? So that there'll be limited activity on our part once we get this in motion. So it's just to give you an idea that the state is kind of upping basically the tracking of groundwater sustainability plans. This is the latest.
Can I ask, how much time do they give us to update our plan if it's October?
The project information, essentially, we're gonna have about a couple of weeks to review that information. We are not supposed to update the information. We are supposed to let them know if they accurately pulled the information into the database. And then we have to update information on what did we implement for the plans. That's due April of every year. So when we submit the annual report. So I wanted to talk a little bit about interconnected surface water. We're all aware that we've been doing the dry season monitoring for the last few years. And the Department of Water Resources, if you really read the detail in their corrective actions, want us to more significantly address interconnected surface water. When we adopted the plan, we have 2 monitoring wells that are near surface water sources that we were proposing. And we installed additional monitoring wells last year. So we're hoping that we can use groundwater levels in these wells that are near creeks as a proxy for that monitoring. And when we got their corrective action, they weren't very satisfied with our monitoring well, Scotts Valley Water District MW4, which is along Bean Creek. And the reason for that was because we had modeling results, and there wasn't a very good correlation between what we were seeing in the model for the creek and the groundwater levels. So they have noted that they're going to want us to address that. In addition to that, they are in the process of developing guidelines for what they expect to see for interconnected surface water. So we're still waiting on that. But in the meantime, we're trying to start to evaluate some of the data that we actually have been collecting over the last few years. This ended up being fortuitous. Scotts Valley Water District just decided to put this pressure transducer in their own well a few years back. It's been monitoring it, so it was actually available for us to analyze it. I wasn't expecting, so I just kind of came across this just a month or 2 ago. So what you're looking at here, find my pointer. So the map at the top shows our location, Bean Creek and Mount Herman Camp, where we have been going out every May through October and collecting stream flow data. And about a mile up towards Mount Herman Road, here's the Scotts Valley Water District SB4 well. So I was able to actually take the last 3 years worth of data, 21, 22, 23, and plot up the flow in the creek that's shown down here at the bottom with these bar graphs. This is mean daily flow in cubic feet per second. So for 2021, 2022, and then 2023. And then plot that up against the groundwater elevations in SB4. And there's really quite a remarkable correlation between these two. They track through the course of the year, and then, if you all recall, 2021 was the second of our 2 dry years. 22 was, kind of an average year, but you can see that slight increase in water levels overall, and again, tracking, and then we had this really good 2023, and you can see water levels in the groundwater really came up. So we're actually seeing a very nice correlation. And as we go through and continue to collect this data and then perform our periodic evaluation over the next couple of years, our intent would be to attempt to discontinue the monitoring on the stream because we believe that the groundwater elevations are an appropriate proxy for that. So that's the goal. I can't promise you, but this looks really good. Just quickly, we also recently installed a monitoring well up at the old Geyer Quarry with the grant funds, and that one is actually just below the Santa Margarita Formation and the Monterey Formation. So this is gonna be really good as we can collect data there. So we're not only gonna be able to see the relationship between these wells, groundwater basin and the creek, but between those two different formations. So hopefully through time, again, that will help show that we have good coverage for Santa Margarita and the Monterey Formation as well, with respect to creeks. So another really interesting piece of data that sort of emerged over the last couple of months was working with the city of Santa Cruz, find out that they have a pretty dedicated stream monitoring location on Mill Creek as they're monitoring releases coming out of Loch Lomond. And they collect this data year round. And so they were able to provide to me, again, mean daily flow in cubic feet per second at the upper part, so this blue gauge up on the Newell Creek just below Loch Lomond. And then we have had a gauge down on Newell Creek just above San Lorenzo River, shown in orange. So this is really interesting data. I plotted up 4 years worth of data, but I'm just gonna show you 2. So 2021, again, I mentioned earlier, was the second of 2 dry years. And again, this is very interesting. So what you're seeing is the blue line is the city's gauge. The orange line is our gauge downstream. So when the orange flow is higher than the blue flow, it's telling us that the stream is gaining, or there's accretion to the stream. This is a very small watershed. There are practically no tributaries. There's not a lot of runoff from any sort of activity that's happening in this area. So this is primarily fed by the groundwater basin. So it really kind of shows us, which we all knew, but it gives us the ability to actually quantify volumes, right? So as we go into the spring here, we can see where we're at, and you can see that as you move into the summer, those lines come closer and closer. So again, groundwater levels are naturally declining. We do extract groundwater nearby from Quail Hollow. So we're actually going to be collecting pumping information as well from San Lorenzo Valley Water District that will really give us the ability to analyze this in a great way. And what's really gets interesting here is as we move into August, you see that the lines actually cross. Now, you have to know that these are open channels that we're monitoring, and there's always some subtle differences. So a little bit of the range of error here is very difficult to really pin down. However, the fact that they're getting this close to each other basically tells us that the stream is no longer gaining anything from the groundwater, and in fact, potentially losing. So what I'm showing down at the bottom is the difference between the two. So this bar graph is showing that we are continuing to have more flow down in the lower gauge, that dissipates through time, and then eventually it drops and it's down below 0 now, indicating that there is less flow in the creek at that point. So again, very interesting information. With a few years of data, we can kind of start to talk about what happens in a dry year, this one. And we can then ultimately pin that to groundwater elevations nearby. And again, the intent would be to monitor the groundwater levels, establish these sustainable management criteria, and just go forward with that, and hopefully reduce some of our surface water monitoring. Here's the second year, so we had a really great 2023, and this is very interesting. So in this case, what I'm showing you on the map is where we located a new monitoring well. This is located in an old San Lorenzo Valley Water District production well. We put a dedicated well in there last year, so we are closing in on a year worth of data out of that, but we haven't had a chance to really analyze it. But again, it hopefully will serve as an appropriate proxy in the future for that gauge. 2023 again was very interesting. So we can see we move in, this is starting in June. We had a little bit of problem with our location, our monitoring equipment earlier in the season. But starting here, you can see they track relatively closely, but what really gets interesting is the city flow measured, it stays pretty flat through the course of the year, but the flow that we're measuring down near Newell Creek really increases through time. So again, we know that the Santa Margarita Formation takes a lot of water, just given its geology, this nice sand, takes a lot of water, and in this case, it releases a lot of water. So you can really see, this is a very interesting phenomenon that we're observing here. So again, we can address the volumes, right? So we can calculate that. So we know in wet years then, this is that relative volume. So hopefully we can use this information to address interconnected surface water.
It's kind of surprising that it's releasing water in August and September. Those would be like really dry years. You'd think that the aquifer wouldn't have anything left to release it later.
This was a really wet year. This was 2023. This is right after we had, very significant
Winter
rain
rains.
events.
Winter rains.
Yeah, but this is the summer now, right? We only measure during the dry season. So again, what we're seeing here is this orange line increasing while the blue line, so it's not related to releases from Loch Lomond Reservoir.
But I'm looking
Our
at the dates
dates
down,
is-
maybe the dates are wrong at the bottom.
No, that's the summer. That's July, August.
So this is called, the rain happened back here and then.
Right, the rain happened back over the winter and we install our gauges, right? We install our gauges in the beginning of May. To do the dry season.
Rain kept going all the way up through like April, start of May.
Yeah, and that's why we wait, because we want to see the effects of the dry season. We don't want to see what happens with rain. We know that's going to go out and flow into these creeks. We're trying to understand what the contribution or the relationship to groundwater is in these creeks.
What this looks like is a pool of water came out 9 months after the rain.
Yeah.
It traveled
It's releasing from
underground,
storage.
which is possible. It traveled underground slowly and migrated all that way and then finally came out.
Yeah.
That's what this suggests.
Yes. So, we need to collect more data, but this is a very interesting start.
Hey, Rob, you may check with the city about, rearing flows and things. I noticed that the city release popped up both years around that time. I don't know whether anybody on staff can comment on that. I'm not familiar with when we have to release extra water from time to time.
Is this affected by a release of New Creek?
Again, the blue line is the release from Loch Lomond. So that is really, this is looking at the operations basically of the city. So this was a release potentially to do with maintenance in the fall.
Yeah, the August one?
Yeah, end of August.
I guess I would add too, Rob, that we have a 1 CFS bypass requirement year round. On the prior slide, you'll see a 0.5. And we can petition to have a lower release during particularly dry years. But anything above there, it's either spilling, which we're not seeing here because it's summer, or it's a maintenance release.
And again, you can see that blue line tends to settle in on that 1 cubic feet per second. So the scale there shows the 1 on the left. Okay. The next topic that I wanted to just briefly talk about was the countywide data viewer. So this was actually, go ahead,
Comment
yes.
is that it might be that the pumping was transferred from in San Lorenzo Valley. So you're going to use
That's
data.
a very good point, yes. So
Could
what,
have
yeah,
been that the groundwater
exactly.
started
So
gaining
there's a
more.
relationship to what was being pumped. And so we have monthly pumping records. I'm actually working with San Lorenzo Valley, and we're hoping that we can actually get electrical records to try to break down how much water they're using from more than a monthly time step down to at least a daily time step, so we can understand potentially what's causing that. But yes, actually very good observation. It's also a function of groundwater production, so we will be analyzing that. We're just working on getting that data still. Okay, the data viewer. So again, we developed the data management system, or the DMS as it's called. And one of the goals of the county in particular, the county wanted to have a place to show all of the available information countywide, but also because Santa Margarita and the Mid-County Groundwater Agency needed to basically provide data as well, jointly developed a web interface to be able to view some of the data that's in our data management system for the public. And there's still a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of QA/QC we need to do with some of the data that's in it. But I think that the framework is starting to emerge, and I think it's time to at least show you what we've been putting together so far. So you can go to the location, it's listed in your packet. You can see that the county-wide, there are almost 500 groundwater wells that are being monitored. There are 53 surface water locations and 4 climate stations. Some of these are not actively being monitored, but available information is trying to make as much available information as we can. So the user can sort this by groundwater basin, so we can look exclusively at what we're monitoring in the Santa Margarita. And these are wells that are associated with our groundwater sustainability plan, or our climate stations, precipitation at Boulder Creek or here in Scotts Valley, the 5 surface water locations that we've been monitoring that we were just talking about. So the user can get on and see information about that. Another thing that you can do is hover over one of these locations and you can click on it. And so here I'm showing an example of San Lorenzo Valley Water District Olympia well number 3. You can pull in some basic station information. You can click on information that is available about the station. And this is all associated again with the groundwater sustainability plan. So groundwater levels, you click on that, you can see a hydrograph in comparison to the measurable objective and the minimum threshold that we have to monitor through time. You can look at some of the water quality parameters, for example, iron or manganese in this instance. Again, monitoring results compared to the measurable objectives and minimum thresholds. So the site's, I think, pretty user-friendly. It's not trying to do a whole lot more than that. Go back to the stations. You can look at these by a table, the whole basin wide. You can do it by a map. There's a little bit of basic layering functions. Again, try to keep it pretty simple. You can turn off the streams if those are a little too busy for you. And if you're really trying to get oriented, you can pull up labels and those will come up as you zoom into these locations. So again, there's still a lot of work to do with cleaning up the data to make sure it's proper, but the site itself, I think, is taking pretty good shape. Okay, and then lastly, I wanted to talk some about coordination with the Santa Cruz Mid-County Groundwater Sustainability Agency. For those of you who are new to the board, coordination is pretty easy to do since Regional Management Foundation has a contract to staff both agencies, so coordination is pretty tight. We always look for opportunities where we can to leverage that. So there are 3 things that I wanted to talk about. Recall that the Mid-County Groundwater Agency is critically overdrafted, so they had to submit their groundwater sustainability plan 2 years before we did. So they're always out there a little bit in front, and so there are always opportunities for us to learn from what they're doing. The first thing that they've been working on is their periodic evaluation. So the State Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, requires periodic evaluation at least every 5 years. And they're at the point at which theirs is due at the beginning of next year, so January 2027, which is just a few months away now. They just posted a draft evaluation on their website earlier this week, and they will be bringing this to their board for comment in September. It was a pretty substantial level of effort. The budget was about $150,000 to perform the periodic evaluation. And I say that with first of all, the DWR only identified 1 corrective action for them. And recall that we have a few. So their level of effort with respect to correcting things that DWR wanted addressed was pretty minimal. I'll say the basin's a little more complex, and there's certainly more data that they have to collect. But it just gives you a frame of reference for the level of effort that they went through. MGA also opted to not amend their groundwater sustainability at this time. So that's an optional effort. And at this point, I think primarily what's happening at MGA is they have a couple of pretty substantial projects. You're all aware of the Pure Water Soquel project, which is expected to be operational very shortly, within weeks. But that was still behind the schedule that they originally anticipated back in 2020. So they really haven't moved those implementation projects quite far enough along to really evaluate whether or not the sustainable management criteria that they developed were appropriate. So they're not proposing to change any of that at this time. But we would anticipate potentially at the next go-round that they would be looking to update their plan. With respect to meters, so similar to our groundwater sustainability plan, they had a desire to establish a metering program for non-de minimis users. So those users over 2 acre-feet per year. So this is not at all domestic uses. They, after a several-month process, adopted a policy to require that. There's a little bit of subtlety down there. They're typically only applying at over 5 acre-feet, unless you're near a stream or if you're at the coast where they're experiencing some seawater intrusion issues. So in that case, they go all the way down to the 2 acre-feet. Even at that, we're only looking at about a dozen or a dozen and a half users that this would apply to. But the policy has been adopted. it really, we focused a lot on what are we gonna do if they're out of compliance? And ultimately, and you're gonna hear this on the next item, with the county working on a well ordinance update, the board opted to really kind of have non-compliance simply get reported over to environmental health, which is responsible for, managing the ordinance. So, however, and again, as you'll hear, if MGA did not have a policy, then the county, once their ordinance is updated, would not assist with enforcing it. So it was kind of key to have a policy in place so that the county can help us in the future if we're experiencing non-compliance. And finally, they did reserve the right to issue financial penalties, but we kind of consider that to be in extreme cases. And again, an example might be where we're continuing to experience seawater intrusion. If somebody's simply not complying with letting us know how much water they're using, then that can be problematic. So it may be a point at which we look to use the fines, but we really don't want to have to use those. So again, that is something over the course of the next few meetings we can have a discussion about when Santa Margarita is interested in proceeding forward in addressing that. It's in the groundwater sustainability plan, but we have been deferring that. Again, I think it was helpful that MGA went out and went through this exercise. Finally, long-term funding options. We had a pretty healthy discussion about this at our previous meeting. We talked about allocating funds from the budget. So again, MGA is out ahead of us by a couple of years. They also have a grant that is going to assist in developing funding mechanisms. So they had an interest in moving forward pretty immediately. And when we met in May, it was my thinking at least that we would potentially join with MGA and issue a joint request for qualifications and potentially do this together under the potential that there might be some cost savings associated with that. It was pretty clear at this board meeting, we're not quite ready to move that aggressively. In addition to that, thinking a little bit more about the scope of the work that we would perform, there's probably not a lot of cost efficiency. And I say that because it seems that there's a lot of necessary interaction with the board, right? And we're not gonna sit these two boards down. They're still very different in terms of the issues that each agency is facing. So I don't think there's a joint effort that we could have with your board, with your private users, with the agencies that are actually involved in those. So sort of coming to that realization, decided to move forward with the RFQ for MGA. We did identify 5 firms that kind of specialize in this, did a lot of research in groundwater sustainability agencies that have adopted fees and found these firms that have all been working for them. And so that was issued, they're due back August 30th. MGA was assuming a budget somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000 for this first level of effort. And again, that would be identifying and engaging with key interested parties in the basin, evaluate based on that feedback from those interested parties, what are the best mechanisms, bring that to the board, get a preference from the board, and then tell them essentially what's the roadmap then for implementing that fee. So I think it was good to move forward with MGA. I think there's a lot that we can learn coming in from the responses from some of these firms. And I think there are at least enough similarities between the basins that as we go through this process for MGA, that there's some value that we'll be able to bring over here and then bring back to the board at some point any proposed work activities for your consideration. So that's my update.
Okay, any additional questions? Jack, I'd like to welcome you and Alina.
Yes.
Hi, Alina's from San Lorenzo Valley. She's the alternate,
Yes.
I believe. And I'm blanking on your last name.
Lane.
Lang. Okay. Vaughn. Yes.
Question, you talked about how they fortunately put together their own policy on enforcement before the county adopts one, so that they can benefit from the county being the enforcer, right? So the next item on the agenda is the county well ordinance update. So does that speed up our timeline of considering something like that, or does that not apply to
I
us?
think we still have enough time. The county still has a bit to go.
Okay,
I don't think we have to push it too hard, but again, I think that we could come back in October and maybe give you some more information on that policy, or maybe get you a reference to it. We did hire a special signal legal counsel at MGA.
Yeah.
In addition to county counsel, which serves as the general counsel, so we really worked very closely with them in developing that policy.
okay. I mean, not that it necessarily makes sense, but I don't wanna be the one agency that misses the boat and then we have to send Chris out with warrant powers to,
Well, if they were to adopt their ordinance first, we could still come in and adopt the policy afterwards, and then they would enforce, so I don't think it's, puts too much pressure on us.
okay, thanks.
Anyone else? Doug or Mark?
No.
We have no visitors online still?
We have 7 online attendees, but at the moment, I'm not seeing any hands go up.
Okay, well, this would be their time. None? Okay, all right, thank you, Rob, it was great, as usual. We'll move on now to more greatness. Sierra, this is the proposed well ordinance update.
Yeah, so this is an informational item for you right now on the status of this well ordinance update and how we've been coordinating with the GSAs and what impact we think it will have on the GSAs and the member agencies and other interested parties as well. So, can we go to the next slide? So I'm gonna start with some background information. I know all of you are quite familiar with the water situation here in the basin and within your own districts, but this well ordinance applies countywide and things are a little different throughout other parts of the county. So one thing that is true is that all our water supplies are local. We're either, no matter where in the county you are, you're almost certainly pulling from either local groundwater or surface water. We do have a very small amount of recycled water that's currently only used for irrigation. That will change again very soon when Pure Water SoCal comes online, but for the time being, as you can see, water use in the county, it's about 50-50, a little bit heavier on the domestic and commercial water uses, a little bit less so on agriculture. And then the really big thing to look at in this is that 76% of the water used in the county is groundwater, but used by people. So it's not just important for this basin, it's really critical countywide that the groundwater is managed properly, and not the entire county isn't under groundwater sustainability agencies. About half the geographic area of the county has no other organization that's got some sort of oversight of groundwater management, so it's really critical that we take that role seriously. Next. So what is the county's role? The county's responsible for developing ordinances through our county code. They give us the power and the authority to oversee, enforce various protections. So for example, well construction and destruction, those are ordinances that the county has. We also have individual water systems and small water systems, so additional requirements on top of just the construction of the well for how those systems can be managed. We issue permits. I'm sure many of you have had a great experience coming to the county for permits. In this respect, it's really, I'm talking about well permits. So if you wanna drill a well within the unincorporated county, then you need to come to us to get a permit. And it's not just drinking water wells, it's also monitoring wells, irrigation wells, and anything that puts a hole in the ground essentially. And this version of the ordinance, we're going to also be including soil borings, which is new to the code, although it is something we've been requiring for a while because it's a state mandate. So basically, anytime you're drilling into the ground and you have a possibility of encountering groundwater, you're going to need a permit for that.
Even shallow situation? What's there's a depth, right?
There's a depth, I think it's like 10 feet, it can be pretty shallow, yeah.
And you permit for a 12-foot hole?
Potentially. And then enforcement comes to the county as well. So our authorities are only for unincorporated county unless we have agreements with other agencies. So for example, we do have an agreement with the city of Capitola that we will do their groundwater, any well permitting in the city of Capitola will come to the county. Watsonville and Santa Cruz have their own ordinances, and so well permitting within their jurisdictions is something that in the moment they can take on themselves. And Scotts Valley, it's a little loosey goosey at the moment, but we will have something.
What about Scotts Valley?
We have been taking the well permits for Scotts Valley for some time, but we don't actually have a strong agreement written in place to manage that. We also don't have authority over state and federal land, so that's important to realize. There is a lot of state land within the county that, UCSC, for example, they can put permits, they can drill wells without necessarily having to get a permit from the county. So that gives you a sense of the scale of who's impacted by this. All right, next. So another reason why it's important that we have good management and oversight of well permitting is because it really is everywhere. These are all the wells in the county's database. These are not all drinking water wells. You'll see a lot of them in the cities. Those are more likely to be monitoring wells of some kind or another. But this shows the geographic range that really it is throughout the county, and therefore it's really critical that it be thought through well. Next. So this, one of the things that we did in the beginning of this process was start to take a look at how many well permits are we getting now? We know that there is growth happening in the county, but we also know it's mostly happening within the urban services line where there are water districts supplying water. We don't have large developments going in the unincorporated area outside the urban services line, but we do have some wells being drilled there. You'll see most of the wells, so in the past 5 years, there's been, I can't read that from this far away, so I need to put it on here. 285 well permits over the last 5 years. But the vast majority of them, over 200 of them have been either replacement wells, so, that can happen for any number of reasons, or supplemental wells, which is something that we basically, when we don't require someone to destroy their original well, maybe they're maintaining it for whatever reason, maybe using it for irrigation or supplemental supply, that's called a supplemental well. So we have very few new water uses coming in. It averages out to about 12 permits per year that is a new water use, and 10 of those are for domestic purposes, which we consider de minimis. We only get, 1 to 2 well applications a year for a new large water use, which would be like a water system or a large irrigation well. So not a lot of new water development happening in the county right now. Next. So the purpose of the well ordinance, the original purpose of the original well ordinance, which dates back several decades, is primarily for water quality protection. Because when you drill a well, you're creating a conduit for contamination from the surface to get down into the aquifer. And we really don't want that to happen. And so we created things like well seal requirements, distances from things like septic systems or other potential sources of groundwater contamination. And requirements for how the well is constructed to make sure that it is watertight from water getting in. It also implements requirements of our general plan and our local coastal plan. The new update, however, expands some of this a little bit to also consider groundwater management and public trust resources. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that is. We are also updating not just the well construction ordinance, but also the individual water system. So that's the additional requirements. If a well is being used for domestic purposes, there are some additional requirements. It's mainly about water quality and yield. And so we're making some changes there. Next. So what are the reasons for the update? There's a lot of them. The last time the well ordinance was updated was 2009, and a lot has changed since 2009. First and foremost, the passage of SMGWA and the fact that the county is no longer the only entity that has authority over many of the things that the well ordinance is looking to protect. Senate Bill 552 is one that came out a couple years ago, and it looks to the counties to ensure that you're taking some responsibility for domestic wells, particularly during drought periods, and looking to reduce the number of wells going dry during those drought periods. There was an executive order a couple years ago. We brought that information to the board that requires more acknowledgement of potential for well interference. So one well, you don't want to let someone put in a giant well in a way that's going to dewater the surrounding area. That's not really acceptable. And it also had a requirement for the groundwater agencies to take. So in the middle of sorry. There's also questions about environmental public trust resource and protection, and that's down to a lot of case law that's happened in the past few years. There have been a number of really substantial lawsuits that have taken place that have basically said that you can't just put in wells without considering the potential impact to interconnected surface water, and that you can't just have ministerial well permit approval. So ministerial is basically you have a checklist of requirements, and if you meet those requirements, then you can't deny the well permit. And that basically case law is now saying that that's maybe not acceptable in all cases. We also have our climate action plan and our drought response and outreach plan, and we've had some concern from the National Marine Fisheries Service about the possible impact to endangered species from having a ministerial well permit, which is what we had before. And then again, the soil borings, we don't have soil boring protections in our ordinance, although it is required by the state that we are managing that. Next slide. Okay, the process to date. So we spent a long time at the staff level gathering data, looking at what other counties and other well permitting jurisdictions were doing in response to some of these issues that were coming up. Looking over our own processes to see where the problems were and what data was missing, and then also just pulling together all of the data that we had in our database and DWR's database and some other water quality that was not captured in the main data collection spots. So spent some time doing that and coming up with sort of a list of like, these are the major updates that we need to make. We brought this to the county's Water Advisory Commission, and they said, yes, you're moving in the right direction. Form a technical advisory committee. So we did that. We had 4 meetings with the technical advisory committee, and then a number of additional meetings with key stakeholders. And really, we did meet with the GSAs a number of times, but mainly they were about the environmental concerns. We had a lot of interest from NOAA Fisheries and CDFW and the Nature Conservancy and Cal Trout and Trout Unlimited were very interested in what we're doing here. We went back to the Water Advisory Commission earlier this month, and they said with a draft of the updated ordinances and all of the supporting materials, which are extensive, and our next step will be to go to the Planning Commission, which will likely be this fall. We're just waiting for the environmental review to be completed before we can finalize the date. Then it'll go to the Board of Supervisors, then the Coastal Commission, and possibly back to the Board of Supervisors, depending on the changes start. I got a little ahead of myself on the next steps. we can move on. So I mentioned there was a technical advisory committee. These are the participants on that technical advisory committee. Some of those names you'll probably find familiar, like Rob, who attended on behalf of this agency and also Mid-County Groundwater Agency. We tried to get a good diversity of technical experts. You know, this was not so much it was much more focused on like the actual technicalities of the ordinance, and not so much about trying to get like a broad group of opinions on it. We need this to be really focused on these technical issues. So we think we got a pretty good mix, and I think those meetings were very successful. All of the materials for all of those meetings are on our website, so you can see kind of the succession of how those meetings went. Next. So some of the significant changes, we now will have a tiered approach to our well permitting. This is the direction a lot of jurisdictions are going. So that means that the small domestic wells are gonna be considered tier 1, or replacement wells under a certain size are gonna be tier 1. Tier 2 wells will be replacement wells that are going to be replaced in more or less the same capacity as the existing well. And then newer wells will be either tier 3 or tier 4 depending on their size. Tier 4 wells are going to be any new water use over 50 acre-feet a year. And that would be discretionary, which means it will have to require additional analysis, including SMGWA. And it does allow the county, if necessary, to deny the permit if there's just no way that the impacts can be avoided of that well. For domestic wells, the main change is that there's gonna be more extensive water quality and yield testing at the time that the wells are developed. And that's partly because we have pretty minimal requirements right now on water quality testing. And we know we have issues in parts of the county. It just isn't right that people may think that their water is safe when in fact it's not. So we're also going to be requiring water quality and yield testing at time of sale for domestic wells for similar reasons. We don't want someone thinking that they're buying a house with safe water and then finding out that or maybe worst case, never finding out that it actually had elevated nitrate or arsenic or some other contaminants. We're not requiring, we haven't quite figured out for the well construction what the requirements for treatment would be, but for time of sale, we're not requiring treatment, it's just a disclosure. And then the metering and reporting will be required on all new wells going in that are new and replacement wells that are over 2 acre-feet a year. Okay, this gets a little bit into the requirements for the various tiers. So again, tier 1 is the smallest wells. This gets a little bit more into what that means and what they look like and the required, the basic requirements. So, we need setbacks from streams, setbacks from nearby wells, questions about SMGWA, and then the number of permits we anticipate per year, and that's based on kind of looking at the past five or so years. So again, for tier 1 and tier 2 wells, which is the vast majority, there's very little change, and we're trying to keep it as simple and as streamlined as possible for them. Just some really basic setbacks and seal depth. Next. A little bit of just context there. I'm not going to get into the technical work that we did on concerns about interconnected surface water and public trust resources. We did do a little bit of work regarding making sure that the setbacks are appropriate around streams, and especially for larger wells, making sure that we're not dewatering areas that are critical. So this is the county's map of the Salmonid bearing streams. So basically these are the priority areas for interconnected surface water because they have a federally listed species in them. All right, next. And so we have a groundwater, this map is something that has been a long time coming. It's our groundwater extraction concern map. And it basically shows areas where we do have concern that additional wells, especially new wells, new water uses could have an impact on some sort of resource. So along all of those streams that you saw on the previous map, we have a buffer, and that's it basically just requires a deeper seal if you're in that for smaller wells. The areas in yellow along the coast are areas of concern for seawater intrusion. And then up at the summit area and over kind of at the north part of the county, there's areas where we know we have water supply challenges where it's just a area of fractured rock and people are tapping into the fractures. And so we have to be particularly careful about new wells going in there for concerns that they would themselves not have a sustainable water source, or that they could really impact neighboring wells. So these are areas that have slightly different requirements. Oh, and the purple is karst. It's an area mostly kind of by the university, but we do have extra requirements around there as well. All right, next. Okay, getting to what is the effect on this agency. So every well permit that is received within the boundary of the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency will be directed to the agency for their information. And we will be soliciting comments for the larger wells, tier 3 and tier 4, because we don't wanna permit a well that's not consistent with the GSP. And we definitely need to make sure that this information is communicated, because how is the agency supposed to manage their groundwater when there's this, these things happening that could potentially impact groundwater sustainability if they're not aware of it and able to evaluate it. So, some tier 2 wells, just given that some of them can be quite large, would also be, we might ask for some, feedback. And that'll most likely just be from at the staff level, and that data will be collected. There's 2 parts of the code that we added specifically to support the work of the groundwater agencies. The first one, as Rob alluded to earlier, is acting as sort of the backstop for the metering program. So if a groundwater sustainability agency has a required metering condition for wells, basically we can enforce that. And that really came out of the work we did in Mid-County, where we found that the language of SMGWA is just not, it's challenging for the agency to be the enforcement entity, whereas for the county. So that would be something that we could coordinate on together. And then also the requirement that there are projects that are important for sustainability may have exclusionary zones. So for example, Pure Water SoCal has an exclusionary zone around the injection wells where you cannot have domestic wells going in. And so we currently in our well ordinance don't actually really have a mechanism to deny those well applications. So we needed to make sure that there was some mechanism in here that if a GSA supported project is going in and there's an exclusionary zone that's required as part of the permitting for that project, that we can be consistent with that at the county. We just don't want any conflicts in the language of our code there. That's definitely not helpful, so hopefully that will prevent any future challenges.
Excuse me? So is that the control zone that's mentioned here?
Yes. And then all of the information that we're collecting as part of our, as part of our process, can definitely be shared. Water quality testing, yield results, is really important for the basin management as well. So I think that was the last, the next one is next steps, which I already sort of flew through. So this is really the beginning of the process, bringing it to your board. We've been presenting to other interested parties as well. That's the kind of the beginning. The next big public meeting will be when it does go to the planning commission, hopefully in October.
Well permitting is a completely different department and desk than building permitting in the county, right?
It is.
That's important for people to understand.
It is, yes.
Whatever experience they've had with permitting in the county may
Yes.
apply. In tier 1, the de minimis domestic less than 5 connections, the connected stream setback column, are those the same, that 50-foot or greater or deeper seal within 1,000 feet of a stream? Is that the same rule that applies now?
The 50-foot setback does apply now. The 100-foot seal isn't, I think we actually only currently require a 50-foot seal. The 100-foot seal, we found through our extensive analysis, does provide some additional depletion protection. Also, very, very few wells are going in with seals less than, not just 100 feet, but really less than 200 or 300 feet. It's very uncommon, particularly by streams because of the water quality impact of the surface water, groundwater connection there. So that 100-foot seal is new, but the 50-foot setback has been there.
Okay. So it's greater than 50 foot and 100-foot deep seal within 1,000 feet of stream.
Yes.
1,000 feet is a long ways.
Yes, but that was what again, we did pretty extensive modeling using the resources available, and that was sort of where that seemed like an appropriate line. Closer to that over an extended period of time, like looking at 10 to 20 years, you still see depletion from the stream even if you're within 1,000 feet of it. So that combination of the setback and the depth of seal gave us a reasonable level of protection for the streams.
But people could still apply for a permit to punch a de minimis hole 51 feet from the stream.
Yes, but there's still a setback, or there's still a seal requirement, it's just not necessarily, yes, that is true. And I think we have pretty strong language that allows occasional waivers on this when conditions can't be met for de minimis, because we do understand there are people who have parcels that just don't have appropriate setbacks once you take into account a building footprint and the septic system requirements. So waivers are possible, they might just require additional analysis.
It's a tie.
This is just a, observation. So you said that the replacement and the supplemental wells were the most during that 5-year period.
Yeah.
You guys have a sense of why that was? Was that due to the groundwater levels dropping, people chasing water, or was it more mechanical?
So one thing that I can say that we don't do very well right now is capture the reason why a well needs to be replaced or needs a supplemental supply. We actually don't ask people that on our forms right now. So we have compared though, the rate of replacement and supplemental well permit applications during drought periods and during other, more wet periods. And there really isn't a substantial difference. We aren't seeing a lot of wells going dry due to drought based on just kind of looking at the numbers over time, not since the 70s. In the 70s, when we had that big drought in the late 70s, we had a lot of wells going dry, but those wells were usually quite shallow and they were replaced with much deeper wells, which have been much more resilient to more recent droughts. And our groundwater levels are doing fairly well compared to the rest of the state. So right now, I'm assuming that the reason why these are just wells that have reached the end of their life or have gotten, we have some parts of the county have a lot of minerals and, it's just, they can't last forever and so they need to get re-drilled.
Wells do run out in our neighborhood, that there's a cycle of that happening. But there's also pockets that, I learned that Monterey has pockets of sand. And so people will sink wells into them, hit one of those pockets, and then they'll draw the water out and then it runs out because it doesn't have connection to the surface or anything to recover.
Yeah.
So they'll have to drill a new well elsewhere and try and find a pocket of water somewhere that maybe lasts them the next 20, 30 years.
We had actually considered having the Monterey formation included in that concern areas map where there might be additional yield testing requirement because of that, but it's just so inconsistent that it seemed like for the vast majority of people, it would just be extra cost and expense and really to no benefit. But that is one of our more challenging aquifers, if you can call it that. In some parts of it, you can't call it that for sure, but
Pockets.
yes.
In the aquifer, basically.
Yeah. Jack Gillis.
Yes. So where the county has a contract with the city about well permits, would all these rules apply to that kind of well?
And we could, I suppose, make any sort of agreement we wanted, but we're not gonna wanna do permitting differently on various jurisdictions. So what we plan to do when this is finalized is basically present it to all the other jurisdictions and say, if you want us to do your well permitting, these are the standards that we will be applying, and we can sign an agreement. And, I think that it would be basically all or nothing. Although one thing that you could say is we want you to permit domestic wells, but we'll permit monitoring wells. That's actually the conversation we're having with Watsonville, is like, which wells do they wanna permit? And they can send us everything that doesn't fit within that. So that's a possibility we could have with Scotts Valley, so.
Would it help the conversation if cities had conversations before these were fully adopted? I'm saying that not knowing what that'd even be, but just
Yeah,
sometimes it's better to have a voice earlier in the process instead of afterwards.
I don't know that it would really change our process because we're not gonna change what we adopt for our well ordinance based on what other jurisdictions would want in their ordinance. But we do need to notify everybody that we're doing this, and frankly, you do bring up a good point that I have not spoken to the city of Scotts Valley about this. I've spoken with water district staff, but not city staff.
And so Nate Gillespie's name on your
Yes.
list, he's our operations manager here.
Yeah.
At the district. Okay, Jeff, one more time.
So after the Loma Prieta earthquake, one of our neighbors to rebuild their house was required by the county to put in 100 boreholes, 100 feet deep each to pin their foundation down. It was in a panic right after the earthquake. Everyone's like, the dirt's just falling all over this. So they had to do a pretty heavy duty foundation. So would each of those boreholes, 100 boreholes, require a permit by the new, because they just filled them with cement.
Yeah.
It's not gonna affect the groundwater because it's a seal. It's almost like a sealed well. It's like after well's done, that's what they're implementing. So
Yeah.
those would
So
require-
the way the soil boring program works is you basically get a project permit, not a per hole permit. So if you're doing a project that has 5 boreholes, there's a cost for that. But it's not like every individual borehole gets a permit. You get a permit for all 100 boreholes would be covered under one permit. One inspector would come out at the time that it's drilled or at the time that it's filled in to ensure that that was done correctly. Because if they're 100 feet deep, that is definitely the potential for a conduit if they are not sealed correctly.
So more like for the exploration.
That's the main time that this issue comes up exploration for various development or building or even wells.
We have to do exploration for, if you're gonna do construction, you have to go in and sample the soil and make sure what kind of soil it is before you get a permit
Yeah.
for it. So you have to get a permit in order to do the samples, so you can get the permit for the construction.
Yes, and that's, it is state law. It's not like the county's trying to force this on people because we want more work. It's been the state law for a while and we had not been enforcing it fully. We have been enforcing it fully now for a while. It's actually under a policy right now. And the policy is pointing to the state law and that's how we're able to enforce upon it. But this is just bringing our code into compliance with state code and making sure that they're consistent with each other. You can actually read all about the soil boring permit the process is already on our website and it has all the documentation that you need and all of the drillers, anybody doing soil borings as part of their career. They've already been involved in the outreach process that we did when we were developing that program a couple years ago. But it wasn't in our code yet, and now it will be.
Okay, anybody else? Anyone in the great unknown?
Let's take a look.
Hand up above us.
I think I just raised mine. I'm not seeing any of the attendees online with hands up, but if you have a question, you're welcome to
Yes, please.
indicate on there.
Okay,
Okay.
all right. So, thank you, Sierra.
Yeah, thank you.
And so next we have the biannual review of the conflict of interest code.
Correct. I have this one, so every 2 years, an even number of years, the agency has the opportunity to review the existing code and see if any amendments or modifications are necessary. And so we took a look and there's a fairly minimal administrative update to job title. But it is important because this ties directly into the system that allows the electronic filing, so we want it to be accurate. So as you can see in the packet as proposed there on page 31, we're updating San Lorenzo Valley Water District's district manager, which was the position title formerly used, to general manager, but otherwise no proposed changes.
Okay, any comments, questions? Okay, anything from,
Let me take a quick look online just to
Thank you.
confirm, sorry. That's what I was gonna. Thanks. you see? No, okay, thank you.
Okay, so we have to adopt this?
We
It's
do, we have to
administrative, so-
adopt it, but we still need to, get a motion and take it.
Right, no, I understand. Okay,
So moved.
second?
I'll second.
Okay, and Eden and Dallas?
Thank you.
Okay.
Director Cassidy,
Aye.
Director Dillis,
Aye.
Director Engfer,
Aye.
Director Koopman,
Aye.
Supervisor McPherson,
Aye.
Director Perry,
Aye.
Director Pollock,
Aye.
Director Smalley,
Aye.
and Director Leishman,
Aye.
and Director Lemon.
Aye.
Passes unanimous.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, next item is the groundwater well monitoring agreements between Sigma and member agencies. And I'm gonna excuse myself. If something happens, my vice chair will take over.
Okay. I have this one as well, and so on this item, by way of reminder, the agency received a grant from the Department of Water Resources that allowed for the construction of 7 monitoring wells in the basin. Excuse me, I'm gonna flip through the packet to get to that page so you can see the wells identified. Under the proposal, so the 7 wells are listed there, you can also see them in the packet. 4 of those wells reside within the jurisdiction of the County of Santa Cruz. 3 of those are within the jurisdiction of San Lorenzo Valley Water District. And so what this agreement is proposing is to transfer the ownership of those wells from the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency to the respective agency within whose jurisdiction they lie. Under the proposed agreement, the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency will continue to fund the operations and maintenance and monitoring of those sites, with the rationale being that but for the requirements under Sigma, the member agencies would not have otherwise constructed those monitoring wells. And so it seemed appropriate that the costs to do the ongoing monitoring remain with the agency itself, with the GSA. However, going back to prior discussions of the board, the agency did not intend to lead on capital projects and did not intend to have capital assets. And so by transferring those to the member agencies, those agencies are formally taking on the ownership and the individual well sites as a capital asset. And so at this point, the proposed agreements have been reviewed by the Santa Margarita Agency Council. They've been reviewed by San Lorenzo Valley Water District Council, as well as County Council, as well as by DWR, because ultimately, because of the grant funding, the grant terms and conditions include a clause that states that in order to transfer them, it's subject to approval by Department of Water Resources. And so process-wise, this is coming to this board first for consideration. It would then go to the individual agencies, so both San Lorenzo Valley Water District and the county for approval, and we would get final sign-off and approval by Department of Water Resources as well.
Okay, is there any questions?
Why are we bothering to do this? I mean, I know we're not supposed to have any assets, but we were given money we didn't wanna, build up things, but we were given money to do this and we did it. So we have these things. Why do we have to get rid of them, get rid of the ownership? There's a benefit here that we're gonna get by getting rid of them?
Well, I think it's just consistent with the direction that the board previously laid out to not take the lead on capital projects and management actions and to not intend to have capital assets. So it's certainly possible that the Santa Margarita agency keeps them. They just have to go through a series of steps to do that. But I think this is a conversation that dates back a ways. And so I think the intent all along has been that ultimately the wells would transfer to the individual member agencies.
There must be some impact of it, like down, maybe we have to track it each year or do something with it because we have a capital asset on our balance sheet. I mean,
The
it's
individual
on
member
balance.
agencies, yeah, would be responsible for including that as a capital asset. But in terms of the actual operations and maintenance and the cost of monitoring, that is still gonna stay with the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency.
So we would,
Sure.
would we be in charge of the asset? Like we would be, or they would be now in charge of the asset?
They would be.
So
the
they would
owner of the
decide
asset.
how much maintenance we do on it, or how much we would have to improve it, or do we lose control over it effectively? It's not our asset anymore.
No, I don't think it's a matter of losing control. I mean, the GSA is working in close coordination with the individual member agencies. And so really the objectives of having the monitoring well are the same, right? The monitoring wells were put in place to inform management of the basin. So we're not anticipating circumstances in which an individual member agency, would have different intent on utilizing the well than the member agency. There's a clause in there that does say that if the GSA determines that the well is no longer informing management of the basin, then at that point, the GSA could elect to stop paying for the monitoring activity. But that would also require a change to the monitoring network that's laid out in the groundwater sustainability plan. Because it ties back to what's in the plan. The reason for installing these wells was to fill data gaps in the plan to better inform management of the basin.
I'm just gonna let Terry pipe up because she was trying to get in there.
Just wanted to mention that several of these are in the county right-of-way, and the county, it's not their typical practice to grant other agencies a legal interest in their right-of-way. So they're not gonna grant us an interest in their public right-of-ways. So from the county standpoint, it definitely made sense that we had to transfer it to them because it's in property that they legally own and they're not gonna share with other private or public agencies. San Lorenzo Valley, also, one of the wells is on San Lorenzo Valley's property. And for many, many years, when we first started talking about these groundwater monitoring wells, is that Santa Margarita does not have any capital assets, didn't want to insure them, didn't want to be responsible for that. And so through the agreement that is before you tonight, the agencies acquiring the monitoring wells have all the responsibilities under the grant that we had. So it's not going to be shortcutting. Everything that we were required to do under the grant is being passed on.
Okay. Dale and then Mark.
No, as I understood it, yeah, it was just because we don't own, the agency doesn't own the land. And so it didn't make sense to keep the asset or try to keep the asset, the ownership of the asset. And these are just a portion of all the monitoring wells, correct?
Correct.
So it's not any different than all the other monitoring wells that are owned by all the other agencies. So it's just making it consistent with having all the monitoring wells owned by the agencies instead of a combination.
Right, and I think the difference is just that as the grantee, Department of Water Resources funded the agency to put those in place. But otherwise, to your point, exactly, they're considered part of the broader monitoring network.
Okay, Mark?
Yes, a couple comments that I need to make on this. When I saw this agreement early this week, the transfer agreement that San Lorenzo Valley Water District president would need to sign, I forwarded that on to our internal counsel, but I have not heard back from them as to whether they have any comments on that or not. So I'm not expecting any, but I can't confirm what you were saying that they've reviewed it yet. And second, to the comment about, well, what if an agency such as ours, since we're one of the two that are accepting these, wanted to do something different with the well or make modifications, as one of the member agencies, I don't want us to spend any more than what we need to keep these wells operable. So I don't anticipate that our agency is going to come back to say, oh, well, we need to do and spend X additional dollars to then want to assess Santa Margarita's agency with it, so that we end up paying a large portion of that anyhow as a district. So I don't have concerns with that as an agency member.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
So, oh, and one other thing that I do see compensation for in the event that the wells are deemed no longer needed and need to be destroyed. Our member agency would destroy it, but then the costs of that are to be reimbursed by Santa Margarita. Correct? That's the way I'm reading that destruction aspect on page 35, 36.
Firm on the page, yeah. Let me pull it up. I'm gonna share
Okay.
the screen. Director Smalley, we can follow up. I just want to confirm, it did circulate to the district's council as a part of the process. And so the message that I
Okay.
received internally from the interim general manager was there actually were minor revisions proposed by the district's council and by county, and we incorporated that into the version that's included into the package.
Okay. And I anticipate once I hear that, I can get back to you on that, or somebody else with the district will. Okay, thank you.
I have an answer on the issue of the destruction. I think the agency is Santa Margarita, right?
Correct.
If agency determines that a well is inoperable, failing, or causing undue hardship, agency shall allow the state the opportunity to continue monitoring, operating, and maintaining the well at the state's expense. If the state doesn't agree to assume the responsibilities within a reasonable time, agency shall destroy the well in accordance with the local well ordinance. So Santa Margarita is responsible for the destruction.
Well, sorry, and it gets confusing in the terms with this agency use of that term, but if you go back to the outset where the terms are defined, I think Director Smalley is correct in that
Okay, I see.
it's defined here in the recitals
Okay.
as SMGWA, and it refers
Yep.
down here below to the district as agency. So the agency under this agreement, yeah.
Okay.
It's in the next paragraph that you were reading, Terry, where it says costs for SMGWA covered.
Question?
Okay.
Yes, Jeff.
Just to follow that strand to the way my mind thinks, does that mean we're a perpetual organization if we have to have continuing responsibility for shutting down a well someday? Or would we do something, put money in escrow or something, I don't know. Just how would we do that, 50 years from now? Do you think we'll still be around as an agency?
Well, right now, the responsibility to destroy is falling upon the receiving agency. So it's not Santa Margarita.
Okay.
And then I think there's also a useful life of the well that's determined, it's shorter than 50 years. I'd have to confirm, I think it's 20, but I can go back and confirm that.
Okay, I heard agency, I thought.
Okay. Yeah, the use of agency in this agreement understandably got confusing.
So to clarify, the county or San Lorenzo Valley Water District would have to bear the cost of destruction and filling the hole.
So 6.3 says, the agency, which would be the entity acquiring
Oh,
it,
yeah, the last
is
sentence.
responsible. But Santa Margarita is responsible for the reasonable cost associated with the destruction of the well. So
Okay,
they own the property, they'll do the destruction, they give us a bill and we pay it.
Okay.
Okay, anybody else? Anyone in the public?
Take a look. No.
Okay.
I would like to move to authorize Chair Perry to do as requested.
Don't get too specific.
Subject to SMGWA legal counsel approval of non-substantive revisions.
There we go. Okay, any second?
Second.
Okay, Dale, and Eden was first, Dale second. Roll call?
Director Cassidy,
Aye.
Director Dillis.
Aye.
Director Ankford,
Aye.
Director Koopman.
Aye.
Director McPherson.
Aye.
Director Perry.
Aye.
Director Pollak.
Aye.
Director Smalley.
Aye.
Director Leishman.
Aye.
And Director Lang.
Aye.
And just one closing comment on why it's worded that way is in the event when it goes back to the SLB board or to the county and there's minor revisions that are considered wordsmithing or non-substantive, it does not have to come back to this board for approval, so. Okay, motion passes, thank you.
Okay. Just get back to the beginning here. Okay, investment policy.
I
Yeah.
have this one. Okay, I'll stand. So you recall from last meeting, the reserves have been set aside as part of the budget. We did approve a reserve policy at our last meeting, and this meeting we're bringing forward the investment policy for your consideration. This is the first investment policy that Santa Margarita will be considering adopting. And California Government Code requires public agencies to have an investment policy if it's to engage in investment earning activities. So the policy in the packet was drafted following guidelines from CDAC, the California Debt and Investment Advisory Commission, which produces guidelines annually. So the 2024 guidelines were used in the development of this policy. It's fairly boilerplate. The elements that I point attention to are some of the more important elements that identifies the purpose of the investment, what types of securities can be invested in. So the three critical aspects of the investment policy is that any investment activity, aspects of safety, so that's permitted investments are identified. The agency can't invest in the stock market, but money market funds, some government treasuries are identified as acceptable investments. So safety, liquidity, the maximum maturity is identified at 5 years for government agencies. And really to align with our cash flow needs, we would be looking at an average maturity less than that, but it's in the policy. And then lastly, return on investment. So safety, liquidity, yield. Two other elements to call attention to. There is a quarterly reporting aspect. So we will report, should we pursue investing any activity quarterly, and it delegates the investment activity responsibility to the treasurer, which of course I would do in consultation with the executive team. So the policy will be brought back annually as a, most likely along with the budget. But that's all my notes. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Any idea of rough projections of what we might glean from adopting this and actually investing some of the money that we have static from time to time?
With where reserves were set, in terms of looking at what we would be able to invest, and current markets, I think we're looking at approximately 5%. So reserve levels between, the investable amount's gonna be somewhere between 100 and 200K, so you're looking at 5 to 10K in investment earnings annually.
Okay. Doug?
Thank you. Nick, thanks for the comprehensive policy. The question I have relates to the carve out for the county bank account, which I presume is essentially our checking account. I noticed we have in the current financial report, a $464,000 balance, and I'm no banker, but I think that's above the FDIC limit. So I'm curious why we would have a carve out that would put us at risk and how you would propose to address that.
So great point. It is above the FDIC level, however, I'd say government, deposits are collateralized at 110%. But that being the case with this investment policy, we'll be able to put that investable amount to use. One quickly available option is to do a sweep account that the bank offers, but I think that we'd also like to look into late. But your point's taken, there's amounts presently that can be invested.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, a sweep account would be a great way to go. Thanks.
As I understand it, the bank is required to collateralize over the amount.
Yeah, sorry.
So that's an obligation on their part.
Right.
Okay, anyone else? Anyone in the public? Okay. Great, thank you, Nick. Is this?
I will move that we approve and adopt this
Ooh,
excellent investment policy they put together. Very conservative, love it.
Okay.
That was my motion.
And Jack, being a very conservative investor, would second it. Roll call.
Director Cassidy?
Aye.
Director Dills?
Aye.
Director Ironford?
Aye.
Director Koopman?
Aye.
Supervisor McPherson?
Aye.
Director Perry?
Aye.
Director Pollock?
Aye.
Director Smalley?
Aye.
Director Leishman?
Aye.
And Director Lang?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. Santa Margarita Basin GSP implementation activity, nothing.
Actually, we have one more. We have.
Oh, sorry. Financial, I think we got
Legal action.
sorry, I jumped, but this staff reports.
And so while there's no recommended action on this item, we did want to bring it for board discussion. And so as noted in the packet, Scotts Valley Water District's longtime legal counsel will be retiring at the end of this year. Since 2017, the Santa Margarita Board has contracted annually with Rain and Rain. So Terry Rain has provided legal counsel since that time. And the Scotts Valley Water District Board has expressed interest in potentially contracting with Terry Rain to provide legal counsel on behalf of their agency. And so this item is here to see if there are, to get board discussion on whether or not there are concerns about Terry Rain serving in a dual capacity for both the agency and one of its individual member agency. And so as noted in the packet, there are laws and standards in place related to conflict of interest, and I think Terry's going to talk a little bit more about that.
Great, thanks. So it's been a pleasure working for Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency. I am a real small potatoes person. My budget last year for legal services was $10,000 and I spent $2,500, so I'm 75% under budget. And that really is thanks to Rob and Tim and Sierra and the staff that is making this machine work. It's a dream having the backup and the professionalism that we have, and my job really lightened up as soon as we got you guys on board. So before 2016, I worked with Bob Bosso at Bosso Williams, and I was backup counsel to Scotts Valley Water District. So we have a history. In 2016, I went out on my own after Boswell Williams dissolved, and I was no longer back up to Scotts Valley Water District and Bob Boswell when he was unable to attend. But when Bob told me he was gonna retire, he asked if I would consider working for Scotts Valley Water District in addition to Santa Margarita. And I went, whoa, there's a conflict of interest, whoa, is there a concern? And he said, I don't see it. Now that the GSP is approved, now that we basically are aligned, we are knocking on Mid-County's doors for their forms. We share information. Our water agencies and our sustainability groups are all sharing information. And he didn't think there was a conflict. I talked to Dave McNair about this and we kicked around options. We thought about hiring a local law firm, which is excellent in government work, which is Atchison Barrisoni. And then we thought, whoa, there's some possible conflicts there because they represent the water district for the city. So talked about going out to RFP for Scotts Valley Water District, and I would just stay on Santa Margarita. But then when Scotts Valley Board considered it, they indicated that they wanted me to go over, and we're just throwing it out there. Is the Santa Margarita Board okay with that? Now, the rules on conflict of interest say an attorney can't represent two clients if there's an actual conflict of interest. That's prohibited. But if there is a potential conflict of interest and not an active conflict of interest, you can do it by disclosing it in writing. I have to be able to continue to represent both competently, and I hope I do that. And then it must not be prohibited by law. So those are the standards for evaluating whether we can proceed in the event of a potential conflict of interest. And if a conflict did arise, and if either party was uncomfortable, said, I don't want Terry reviewing it, I don't want Terry doing this, I want Terry to back out, go away, we could either establish parameters or we could hire outside counsel to step in on a limited engagement to get through any specific issues if an actual conflict of interest ever arose. So those are the choices, and I guess it's what's my board is the Santa Margarita board right now. What's your feeling about that?
Can I just add something to it? Scotts Valley is looking at this as sort of a bridge to getting a longest term council. Terry would be probably doing this for a couple of years at the longest and help us acquire a new council that would be, very long term. And that's all part of a succession planning. I think, and I don't want to speak for you, but this is a very low burden. We meet
Correct.
4 times a year, and she said everyone is doing such a great job for her. I think she would, I personally would love her to stay here, first and foremost. But again, I just think it's context. We don't see this as something we're gonna do for the next decade with Terry
I'm
at
60.
Scotts Valley Water.
I'm 67, so no.
Yes, Jack.
Yeah, well, you're great to work with, and I don't see very much risk, but who would say that there's a potential risk? Would we hear that from you? Would we hear that? How would we know that there's a potential risk, even if it was, whatever?
I would think, I kind of have a sense when there's a potential conflict. Tim would be able to figure it out too. If you can feel that there's people in great disagreement over something. And so far, I just went through some agendas. Man, we're unanimous on all of our votes. We have a pretty cohesive group here for Santa Margarita. I want to mention that a lawyer's job is never policy when representing a government agency. So my job is not to get into policy, that's your job. My job is more like procedure, Brown Act? Are we doing this right? Are we complying with FPPC rules? That's the kind of stuff that I'm involved in. I'm not smart enough to know what you guys know with regard to water and, that's way beyond me. So I would say that we'd all try to be alert and we'd all try to do the ethical and right thing. And I don't want to be involved in a conflict if people are thinking that she's compromised, she shouldn't be involved in the conversation. We want to do the right thing for sure.
And I think I would, if I could add one more thing, a consideration for that, and that is looking at what we have done in support of the Mid-County Groundwater Agency, which is, in that case, we have County of Santa Cruz serving as general counsel. However, we have additional counsel that has specific SGMA expertise related to authorities. So that outside counsel was not brought in until the agency hit a point. Rob talked about a little bit earlier tonight in developing the metering policy as the MGA started to look more around fees and funding options, and we started to enter territory where really it was not just general counsel advice. You really needed somebody who had specific expertise in SGMA. And so I think although this agency hasn't arrived there yet, it's probably very likely or conceivable in the near future that this agency would want to consider doing something similar when we get to the point where those issues are really at the forefront. And I think that's whether it's fees or agency contributions, those sort of things where you're more likely to see issues around potential conflict of interest between a member agency and the GSA on those issues. So.
That explains it. When I saw this on the agenda, I was remembering us having the same RFP selection process wherein we chose you 7 years ago. And at that time, Bob was our interim counsel, but he was also Scotts Valley Water District. And he very strongly recommended that he would not do both at that early iteration before we, had to experience all the early bumps in the road of setting up the JPA and everything else. But there was a reference in the minutes or the discussion from those meetings to later on the agency will also need to select a legal counsel who is experienced in water law and more specifically in Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And I never quite understood exactly what that meant, whether there's going to be some magic new breed of attorney that
Yeah, they are, they're amazing. They're really good.
Water law, yeah, but SGMA specialists. So, but at that time when we did the RFP, we got, 10 different proposals, all mostly from people out of the area. There were only 2 in the area, you and Atchison, Barasoni, and Kandati, but we didn't want them to do it because they were representing the city of Santa Cruz. But this is a much later time, things are different.
Well, and the GSP is complete, right? And each agency is going to do their own improvement plans. So that is another factor. So Bob felt that once the GSP was approved, that the conflicts really, the potential of the conflicts really kind of went away. That was his opinion.
Yeah, I wonder if at that time Atchison Barasoni asked the city of Santa Cruz, is it okay if we submit a proposal for this agency that you're also a member agency of? Okay.
I always want to say Atchison, Topeka, and I don't know why. Yes, yeah.
Thanks. Terry, you kind of walked through some potential scenarios. Well, in the scenario that a conflict does eventuate, which is certainly in the realm of possibility, which agency would, and assuming we're not just going to wave over the conflict, because I probably wouldn't be comfortable with that, which agency is going to step back? What are you proposing there? Are we out shopping for new counsel, or is Scotts Valley out shopping for new counsel?
I believe that I drop out altogether, and then we have to get a counsel for each party to handle that specific issue on a limited engagement basis.
So both parties go shopping.
Right.
That's interesting. When I was on the county board of education, there were all kinds of conflicts in the world of education. And one party still stayed.
One
And it
party-
was an actual
But it
conflict.
was agreed upon.
It was, yeah.
Yes, if it's not agreed upon, it could be agreed upon how it would be handled, and then if it couldn't be agreed upon, then you'd have to get two attorneys.
I would imagine in that situation, the board would be really say, hey, listen, this doesn't feel right, there's a conflict here. I think the board would could decide which way that would go. One agency might feel like, no, as far as we're concerned, I want our council to handle this. And speaking for Scotts Valley, I think we'd be happy to engage our own council if this agency felt like, no, we want to keep Terry, you guys get someone else. I mean, I can't speak for everyone on the board, but I don't really think it matters. It could be something the board decides if the conflict arises. That makes sense?
That's correct.
So
Because-
you'd be here voting on that.
Yeah. I just would do.
But could we arrange that ahead of time? To say, this is what would happen should that arise? We would already determine to say, okay, first to this board, we retain Terry.
Priority.
You guys go, Scotts Valley, you guys.
First shot, first shot. We could put that in there, but I just don't want to be the center of a big ugly thing. If people are really, upset over something and confidences are melting away, I would just want it to be done in a way that everybody feels right about it, however it comes down.
Mark?
Yes, I'd like to follow what you just said, Chris. My preference would be that Terry stays with Santa Margarita's agency. It's less work for us then as a board to go out and seek somebody else. Scotts Valley's coming to us. If there is conflict, they should be the ones that need to go shop for somebody else then, in the event of conflict.
I'd be comfortable with that.
Yeah, but is Terry comfortable with that? Because that doesn't sound like you want.
And
That's a-
then, yes, I'm comfortable with that as long as,
Indentured.
yeah, I'm comfortable with that as long as everybody's fine with that.
And that would be, I guess, up to our board. Scotts Valley could make that call if we said, okay, now let's find a new attorney. And then we might not go with Terry, I doubt it, but we will certainly take it up.
Right. Which you're looking to do anyway. eventually.
Yes, we are, that's what I mean. This is gonna be a short-term situation, couple of years.
Yeah, then I think that's a good solution, because it would be nice too, since we've gotten through all the rough patches, to have the consistency and the history and knowledge that Terry has, as long as she's willing to still work.
As long as that's what everyone wants, and everyone's comfortable with that, I think that's the main thing.
We vote on it, or?
I think this was just, I don't know, no, it's not,
This is just
No.
informational, because I
Just for
think
comments.
now, I believe that now it has to go back to Scotts Valley Water District and they have to kick it around.
and so we'll say, I'll take this information back, that was the feeling of this board, and we'll see what we do.
Okay.
We'll let you know. Okay, anything from the public, just in comment?
I'm not seeing any hands go up online, and I'm not seeing anything in the room.
Okay, now we go down to financial report for the period of July 1st, pretty much what's there. Any questions for Nick? Okay. Basic implementation, pretty much, okay? Good, I like that. Any directors have a report? Something you're just bursting with? No bursting? Okay, all right. Future items, all is there. The Western Groundwater Congress in Olympic Valley, that looks pretty fabulous, but I don't think I'm going, but it's quite a resort.
It's only a 4.5-hour drive.
Yeah, that too. But boy, wow. Okay, do I have a, yes?
Before you move on, there was, you went over the budget real fast, I was trying to
Oh, yeah.
put the items on it.
Yeah.
So there was the administrative, we came in under budget on that, which was pleasant, on administrative staff costs. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Robin, Jim.
But and then the monitoring network enhancement came in over budget, or was fairly large, and I was just a quick question about that, any comments on that?
It was a timing issue again. If you recall, we were letting the contract at the end of the previous fiscal year, and we anticipated that there were gonna be more expenses in the previous fiscal year. The drilling rig had some issues, broke down in the latter part of June, so those costs went forward in the current fiscal year. The reality is I actually ran the total budget, originally proposed when we hired the contractor was $795,000. I looked at the budget today, I don't have the exact number, but the final costs, including additional work that we were able to do that wasn't in the planned project, were $704,000. So we finished well under budget. That's just again, a function of when the cost occurred at the crossing of the fiscal year.
And then next year, that would be, there's no more to do?
No.
So that goes away as a line. Thank you.
Okay. There's nothing else? Do I hear a motion to adjourn? Oh, there you go.
That's fine.
Get everyone 5 to 5. Okay, thank you everybody very much. Good seeing you all again.